And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, will Congresswoman Liz Cheney be primaried by a gun-toting elk? And why can't I ever get a retweet from Joe Rogan? And now, the podcast host who never lets a moment pass where he doesn't mention that, yes, he lifts, Pete Dominic.
Well done, sir. Well done. That is the great Pete Coe with the intro, John Carroll with the music, and sometimes the intro. If you want to contribute your talented voice, creativity, ideas, jokes, whatever to this program, you can, because it's our show. It's crowdsourced for real. That shit was hilarious, Pete. Am I that pathetic? Am I? I've never begged for a retweet from Joe Rogan. Do I really talk about how much I lift? It's so good. Okay, thank you very much for joining me here on Stand Up. This is episode 356. You gotta subscribe on one of the podcast apps and pay on the Patreon, please. $5 or more would be great to help support this daily podcast where you get news, you get analysis and commentary, you get entertainment, and you get a friend, it would seem. I've become friends with so many of you, and for so many reasons. I really enjoy the relationships, the conversations, and then I also do feel guilt that there are people that I haven't gotten back to or haven't connected with that I said that I would. I feel guilt about that. So if you're one of those people, now's the time to follow up. Really organized at the moment. And that means I'm not that organized, but more organized than normal. And I really love connecting. I love connecting with folks. So reach out, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Okay, two excellent authors joining me on today's program. Daniel James Brown has written a very important book. His last book, hugely popular, Boys in the Boat. And now they're turning that into a film. I think George Clooney, I read, was directing it. And also, this new book, though, is so important, so good, and I'm really enjoying it. Probably make a great summer read. Called Facing the Mountain, and Daniel James Brown joins me to talk about the book today. It is such a good read. It's the story of Japanese-American World War II heroes that fought for a country that rejected them. It's deeply researched, well-written, entertaining, and very important. I'm excited to have him on the podcast for the very first time. Another first-timer. See? New guests every week here at Stand Up. And that's one of the values. My ability to book these great folks and the fact that publicists from all over the spectrum of important, thoughtful, intelligent folks who are perfect for the show reach out to me now because the podcast's getting bigger all the time because of your support. And so I've got Pete Davis also joining me. His book is called Dedicated, The Case for Commitment in an Age of Infinite Browsing. We had a very interesting conversation about that as well. And Pete, smart dude. I enjoyed my conversation with both of these authors on the program today. And this is day 2 of my new schedule. I mentioned yesterday I am now, instead of staying up very late, 2, 3 in the morning doing the podcast, now I'm getting up very early at 4 in the morning to do the news here, the opening, and get it all posted up and ready. If that makes no difference to you either way, sorry to bore you with it. If what time the podcast, this daily podcast, gets posted does matter, I'd love to hear from you. And I've gotten nothing but support so far for this very minor schedule change, and hopefully ridicule for wasting your time talking about it. Although there could be something interesting to discuss with you, and maybe we will at tonight's Stand-Up Community Happy Hour Hangout, about your personal schedule changes. And I love that kind of conversation because I think it makes life healthier and more efficient, and you can be less stressed and get more done when you learn different techniques and tactics and just research on how we sleep and how we work and how we exercise and eat and all of it, how we think. I love that stuff. So if you want to talk about that, hope to see you tonight at the Hangout. That's 8 p.m. Someone asked me, well, will your new schedule, you're going to go to bed earlier and wake up early, is that going to affect the Hangouts? And the short answer is no. I usually don't do the news segment, which takes a lot of time and work and hours. So I usually don't do that on Fridays because I hang out with subscribers on Thursday nights. So no. And I hope to see you tonight. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic to join and become a subscriber. You'll get the email, the daily email, which will include a link as to where to join us on Zoom tonight, 8 p.m. East. Looking forward to seeing you there. But this is Thursday, and it is time for the news. Let's take a look back now at the last 24. All right, my friends, let's start with the President of the United States, Joe Biden, who is giving a commencement speech on a hot spring day at the Coast Guard Academy, and he made another boneheaded move, the second one in 2 days. I mean, you can't let this guy out, Joe Biden, in front of cameras and microphones on his own, because he always steps on a rake. I mean, there's some truth to that. It's just that in comparison with the last guy, I think we don't care about it nearly as much. And you accept it more and always have with Joe Biden because he's this affable guy in a way, and you feel like he doesn't mean it. But yesterday it was a reporter who, if she could ask a question about the Middle East, he was in a pickup truck. Did you hear that? Driving a truck at the Ford plant. He's like, well, if you stand in front of the truck and let me run you over, I'm just kidding around. And then today it was this.
I can only assume that you will enjoy educating your family about how the Coast Guard is, quote, the hard nucleus around the Navy forms in times of war. You're a really dull class. I mean, come on, man. Is the sun getting to you? I would think you'd have an opportunity when I say that about the Navy to clap, but being here together. Well, all kidding aside, being here together is a victory in and of itself, an important marker in the progress we've made to turn the tide of this pandemic. It's a testament to the skill and military discipline, sense of responsibility you already embody. So there's no doubt in my mind that the 140th graduating class of the United States Coast Guard Academy will reflect the very best of our country in the proudest positions of our service.
Even though you're super dull, I mean, it's not that big of a deal, but at the same time, it's still stupid. I mean, and that one I can speak to as an expert. You don't insult your audience like that. And if you do, you better win him back. It sounds like apparently he did, but self-inflicted comments like this one, I don't really care that much about, because it's hard not to forget the last 4 years ever, and we shouldn't. But the other thing that I think matters a lot more to most people is that actions speak louder than words. And guess what the president did? He handed each Coast Guard Academy graduate their commission scroll as they crossed the stage and took a photo with each one. There are 240 of them. Okay, so it is a pretty hot day. And presidents, I don't think, not only of the United States, of the college necessarily always do that. So actions do speak louder than words. Okay, moving on. We hope and I think want for every level of government to be solving problems, offering solutions for our lives, making our lives more safer and more secure so that we can live healthier and happier lives. I think that is a really vague and general way to describe what you hope government does. Unfortunately, government also does have to have a responsibility where they hold themselves accountable and hold us accountable when we, say, commit crimes, tell lies, do corrupt things, hurt each other. And that's unfortunately what Congress absolutely has to spend time doing right now, which is to look backward at the crimes committed by the last administration and the crimes committed by many of the supporters of the last administration, specifically on January 6th. Unfortunately, Congress has to investigate that. In the past, they've investigated other horrible things, from Nixon and Watergate to the Tower Commission, Iran-Contra, to 9/11 Commission. In between, they've investigated many frivolous things for political purposes, especially Republicans when they had the House chairmanships and they had the power and Barack Obama was president. They invested the horrible attack on the American compound in Libya, Benghazi, Libya, like over 30 times. Yeah, here it is. Writer, author, journalist, Mother Jones, Ari Berman tweeted, Republicans held 33 hearings on Benghazi over 2 years, but say it's time to move on from a Capitol attack after 4 months. 225 House Republicans voted for the Benghazi Commission. 175 House Republicans voted against the January 6th Commission. However, 35 Republicans did vote for the House Commission looking into and investigated the bipartisan commission, the January 6th insurrection. And now I want to share with you some of the floor speeches that were made on the House, both in support and against it. Let's start with the worst of the worst. This is conspiracy theorists, white nationalists, and absolutely radicalized extremist person who puts most of the nuts in nut bars, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia. Sorry I have to do this to you, but I have to because it sets up some context.
I do not believe a January 6th commission will achieve any resolution because we have already had our Department of Justice arrest 445 people with 100 more to be arrested soon. There's also reports of people being held for 23 hours in solitary confinement. That should not be happening. These people haven't even had a court date yet. You see, what's going to happen with the January 6th commission is the media is going to use this to smear Trump supporters and President Trump for the next few years and cover up the damage, the real damage that's happening to the people of this country, which is tearing down our economy, ripping our borders wide open, and hurting this country. I yield the remainder of my time.
Gentleman yields back balance over time.
Okay, thank you for yielding the remainder of your time. One more second was going to really push many of us over the edge. Well, here is Congressman Tim Ryan reacting to Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene and many of the other Republicans who have also apologized or denied the insurrection even happened. Here is Tim Ryan and his reaction to all of it.
30 seconds.
I want to thank the gentleman from New York and the other Republicans who are supporting this and thank them for their bipartisanship. To the other 90% of our friends on the other side of the aisle, holy cow. Incoherence. No idea what you're talking about. Benghazi, you guys chased the former Secretary of State all over the country, spent millions of dollars. We have people scaling the Capitol, hitting the Capitol Police with lead pipes across the head, and we can't get bipartisanship. What else has to happen in this country? Cops. This is a slap in the face to every rank and file cop in the United States. If we're going to take on China, if we're going to rebuild the country, if we're going to reverse climate change, we need two political parties in this country that are both living in reality, and you ain't one of them. I yield back the balance of my time.
Back balance of his time.
Yeah, a slow clap for that performance on the House floor by Congressman Tim Ryan, who appeared in, I think, episode 2 of this podcast. Definitely have to get him back on it. Congressman Peter Meyer is one of the sane Republicans, I guess you could say. He is of Michigan, and he's one of the Republicans who voted to impeach Donald Trump. Well, he took to the House floor in support of the January 6th, the 1-6 commission, it's being called. And this is what he had to say.
Gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to express my strongest support for H.R. 3233, a bill to establish a bipartisan commission to investigate the disgraceful January 6th attack on this institution. Let us be clear. The imperative to have a public, objective, fact-based investigation of the Capitol attack is not a partisan issue, and it should never be treated as such. A violent mob breached this building to disrupt the lawful presidential transition and threaten the lives of Vice President Pence and members of Congress. That this mob attacked the Capitol with the encouragement of prominent elected officials is a chilling reminder of President Reagan's warning that freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. Unfortunately, many who rightly criticized and condemned the attack that day have walked back their words or softened their speech. But even more troubling, there has been an active effort to whitewash and rewrite the shameful events of that day to avoid accountability and turn away from difficult truths. If we avoid confronting what happened here just a few short months ago, we can be sure that intimidation, coercion, and violence will become a defining feature of our politics. On the evening of January 6th, as I was walking back to the Capitol, after it was cleared of rioters, I received a text from a constituent who asserted that those who stormed the Capitol today were the true American heroes, that the election was a fraud, and that I must know that that was true. He then warned, "You can bet that there will be more blood on Congress's hands if you let that stand." I refuse to accept that possibility, this abrogation of a sacred obligation to the Republic. There is no replacement for an independent, bipartisan commission with a mandate to produce a definitive report to the public to clear away myths and fictions and get right on the facts. This is not picking at a scab. In order to scab over, a cut has to first heal. Rather than start to mend, the wound from January 6th was hastily bandaged and continues to fester. Only by airing it out and addressing what occurred can we hope to move past and heal. I applaud my friend Congressman John Katko for his good faith, bipartisan leadership to put this commission in place. I supported this effort in January, I support it today, and I urge my colleagues to do so as well. Thank you. I yield back.
Okay, Congressman Peter Meyer, well done there. So you get a little bit of a taste of what happened on the House floor yesterday. The big news, of course, is that the vote did pass and is going to the Senate. So it looks like we are going to have an investigation into January 6th, and it's going to be bipartisan on the commission and with over 30 Republicans in the House voting for it. And that's so important. I hate when people say, you guys are so, you've got Trump derangement syndrome. You're obsessed with Trump. Why you always looking backwards? Move on. Get over it. It's what? He's not over it, number one. Donald Trump is not over it, number one. Okay, he is still saying the big lie. He is still convincing his followers that the election was rigged and that he won. That is so dangerous. So he's still doing it. And the vast majority of them, over 80% of self-identified Republicans, still support him. So you can't get past that. And you can't get past all of the other crimes that he committed, including simply the crime of being a leader who denies that there is a deadly virus killing hundreds and then thousands of Americans a day. He never gets to get away with any of these things. We must have accountability. We must have justice. We must have better role models in this country and in our lives. Come on now, son. Sorry for the rant, but come on. Gary Tuchman is a great reporter over at CNN. I've known for a long time. I really like him, and he is often on the Anderson Cooper program. Well, they sent him down to Georgia in the district of one of the crazy Congress people who you may have heard said that this was more akin to a tourist visit. If you didn't know better, of course, pictures have now been found of this congressman looking terrified, barricading the door, and proving that he knew that this was not that. He was in the middle of it. And Gary Tuchman on CNN last night, I got to play this, 3 minutes of him talking to this congressman's supporters in their district outside of a grocery store. I love this because almost every one of them concedes that he was wrong about that, but they don't care.
Georgia's 9th congressional district in the northeastern part of the state is one of the most conservative districts in the country. This past November, Andrew Clyde won his first term in Congress with 79% of the vote. So he's popular here.
Whatever he says is 100% for me.
But what do Clyde supporters think about his comments regarding the Capitol insurrection looking like a normal tourist visit? And the photos of him that have surfaced. One of him barricading the House door during the attack. Another with his mouth open in the midst of the danger.
Let me ask you this, okay? I'm going to show you this picture. This picture shows Congressman Clyde helping to barricade the door to keep people out of the chambers, the mob, in the U.S. House of Representatives.
Right.
That doesn't look like a tourist visit, does it?
No, sure doesn't.
I mean, that's a tourist visit from hell.
That's right. He does his job really good.
But when he says it's a tourist visit and you see him here helping to barricade the door, doesn't look like he's telling the truth. Now.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I think you're right on that.
So this is Congressman Clyde. I'm going to show you a close-up of his mouth open
and
while it's all going
on.
Not running away, but he's either yelling or scared or both. We can't tell for sure. And now he's saying, though, that there was no insurrection. It was like a normal tourist visit. You voted for him. Does that disappoint you?
Absolutely. Yeah, but, you know, it's everybody, as far as humanity goes, people are constantly counterintuitive relative to what they say and what they do.
But do you think he's doing this for political gain, that he doesn't want to anger the former president of the United States, who still has a lot of influence, and he's not being honest and honorable?
I would say that anybody in politics is apt to do the same thing.
This woman still likes Clyde and supports him, but
I haven't the slightest idea why politicians say what they say.
But do you agree that maybe he's a little misleading with how he said it?
He shouldn't say that.
That it was a tourist visit.
Yeah.
we talked with quite a few Clyde voters who say they're disappointed in him.
I do not agree with him at all.
And no supporter was more disappointed than this man.
Congressman Clyde said there was no insurrection, that it was a tourist visit. Do you agree with him?
Well, that's horse baloney. That's not true.
So you disagree with your congressman?
Yeah.
And you voted for him?
Yeah, unfortunately.
But most of the Clyde voters we talked to are willing to cut him a break. What happened this past November is one of the reasons why.
It was dangerous. People were killed. People were hurt.
Yes.
Does that bother you that he's calling it a tourist visit?
No, that's his opinion.
It doesn't bother you, though?
No, there's a lot of other things that bother me, like the results of the election.
No, that last guy definitely had a toop, folks. Very bad toupee. Really terrible, which is unsurprising because he also has very bad opinions. Okay, so I thought that was a really good report from Gary Tuchman and important to hear. And I know that probably got your blood pressure up and upset you. So it's never my goal here on the podcast, so sorry about that. But there is one more issue that I want to talk about, which is speculation about crimes. That's a lot of what they are doing on the cable news programs, because more and more is leaking out and coming out about the investigations into Donald Trump, the Trump organization, the Trump family. Hard to keep track of all of these cases. I'm going to be talking to Glenn Kirshner later today for tomorrow's podcast. But I want to share with you some of that speculation that's happening. Again, I don't always love that there's a lot of time spent speculating, because I think it creates expectations, which sometimes come through and sometimes don't, a la the Russia investigation, the Mueller investigation. But I do want to play a couple of clips, especially from some of my friends, Laura Coates and David K. Johnston, who were both together last night on CNN. Aaron Burnett made me a proud dad, because I certainly had them both on my SiriusXM show a lot, and here on the podcast, both of them will be on again soon. But here is what Laura Coates had to say about what we are thinking and hearing and speculating as to what could come out of these investigations.
Laura, we find out about this criminal investigation into a guy 40 years working with Trump, Alan Weisselberg. How afraid should he be?
Well, he probably not only knows where the keys to castles are, he's probably actually has made the keys to the castle. But remember, as Kara talked about, he's not been charged with a crime. He has cooperated in some respects. And of course, everyone assumes that if there is somebody like a Donald Trump within the organization, that the goal of every prosecutor is always to go for the so-called bigger fish. But the CFO of a Trump organization is a pretty big fish in his own right, in the sense that if there is any wrongdoing that's been alleged or might be alleged in the future on the civil or criminal side, the idea that they would just use him as a cooperator to get to somebody else and not pursue prosecution is probably very far from the truth here. But remember, it's always that phrase, nothing is certain but death and taxes. And the common theme for all of this seems to be the way in which the Trump organization, either through payments as benefits or otherwise, was used as a way to maybe downplay payroll taxes, perhaps, or inflate or deflate assets. If he had any involvement in that or personally is liable for what he should have provided in taxes, that seems to be the nature of this investigation. It's a common theme, and the thread seems to be closer and closer to the orbit of the entire Trump organization.
And so while I said I don't love speculation, I do love hearing from experts, former prosecutor Laura Coates on that and others with her background. Of course, David K. Johnston is a journalist, but an expert in a lot of financial crimes, one of my all-time favorites to talk to. He was also on CNN, like I said, with Laura Coates, opposite Laura Coates, on Aaron Burnett's program last night. And here is DCJ, the legend.
So what do you think, David? Does Weisselberg stay loyal here no matter what, or does he turn on Trump?
Well, the trick for prosecutors here is to persuade Alan Weisselberg that if he doesn't cooperate, he's going to die in prison. And what do you want to do? You want to turn on this man who you have been completely obedient to for 40 years and his father before that, or do you want to go to prison? And whether Alan Weisselberg can separate himself from Donald Trump at this point, because he's so closely connected with him and has been so browbeaten by Donald and stayed around, that's really the crucial question here. It's entirely possible you could see both Donald and Alan on trial together under the Martin Act for tax fraud. In New York State, of course, has a Little RICO Act. And I've long thought that that's also another likely charge to be brought, because you only have to show 3 criminal acts to qualify for that. And finding 3 criminal acts in the Trump organization is about as hard as finding a traffic light in Midtown Manhattan.
Oh, snap! David K. Johnson, well done, as always. I got to have both Laura and David on the show. And finally, a little more speculation from someone who worked very closely with Donald Trump for years, I think 10 years at least. Her name is Barbara Ress, and you may have seen her on cable news. She wrote a book now as well about working with Trump, the Trump family, and she was on MSNBC with Ari Melber yesterday, and here's what she had to say about Alan Weisselberg, who she thinks probably is flipped on Donald Trump.
But I do know Donald, and I've seen him operate, and I've seen the organization operate. Weisselberg has evolved from a different person. I don't know exactly where he's at now, but I knew who he was when I was there, and he was a very quiet, recalcitrant kind of guy. He bowed to Donald Trump, he even called him Mr. Trump, and the rest of us all called him Donald. So he adores Donald Trump. You've got that as a given, and that Trump knows and has relied on as this trusted, and probably the only trusted employee left, other than family. But you put Alan Weisselberg, and like you say, everyone has a heart. I would question about that when it comes to Donald, and I mean that. But Weisselberg he'll not go to jail, and he will not go to let his children throw him under the bus, so to speak, because there is no pardon coming down the road. The only thing Trump has to offer anymore is money. And I don't know that money would pay off jail time.
All right, Barbara Rez on MSNBC, and there you go. That is the audio that I've got for you on today's Last 24. And there's so much more news to report. And I always have anxiety about having any kind of platform and not sharing it with you, as well as seeing it as some responsibility, a source, a resource for you to give you as much as I can on all of the important issues that affect you, your family, your community, your country, and your planet. That's what we do here at Stand Up, which is why we call this final part of the news segment the News Dump.
Sitting at the rocky base of a buffalo jump, they've caused internal injuries on today's News Dump.
Pete Coe with another News Dump jingle with help from Phil Round in Wyoming, hence the Buffalo reference, I think. They've got them out there. All right, Pete, thank you very much. Let's start in Gilead. Texas, where the governor there signed a bill to ban abortion as early as 6 weeks into a pregnancy, which, of course, is long before many women even know that they are pregnant. Now they won't be allowed to get an abortion in the state. And I will be talking with Liz Winstead next week about this and other experts and activists on women's reproductive rights, as well as legal experts to talk about where these cases are going. We know that at least one of them is going to the Supreme Court, and we'll see what happens. But very important development there. I want to keep you abreast of the situation regarding abortion in America. Well, this was a sad and ominous statistic, but the number of pedestrians killed in vehicle crashes rose in 2020 despite fewer cars on the road amid the pandemic. Oh, wow. The Governor's Highway Safety Association, an organization that represents highway safety agencies, estimated that there were 6,721 pedestrian deaths in 2020. The fatality rate rose 21% from 2019, making it the largest ever annual increase. Kansas, Vermont, and Rhode Island saw the highest percentage increases in pedestrian deaths. The likely culprits, experts say, are dangerous and distracted driving. I'm going to go ahead and just say people are looking at their phones. Yeah, it has to be why the increase. I have no research on this, and I'm not looking into it at the moment, but that's my guess. So we all need to be a lot more careful and responsible about that. I realize now I didn't mention anything in the opening or at all on today's podcast about what's happening in the Middle East. I see it. The headlines are Israeli airstrikes kill 6, level home in Gaza. Newsweek headline, Russia warns Israel it won't tolerate more civilian casualties in Gaza conflict. Fox News headline, Netanyahu brushes off Biden's call for significant de-escalation in Gaza and says Israel is determined to continue. Haaretz headline, Gaza conflict, Israeli soldier lightly wounded as heavy rocket fire resumes on south. Another Haaretz one, this is an Israeli outlet. Why Netanyahu is in no rush to listen to Biden on Gaza. And Al Jazeera, death, destruction in Gaza as Israel defies truce call. And in the meantime, here at home in Congress, Democrats led by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are leading a push to block the president, Joe Biden, from selling more missiles to Israel amid the violence. She said the U.S. should not be rubber stamping weapons sales to Israel. So those are just a few of the headlines on what is happening over there right now. All right, let's completely change gears with another headline, which is, I guess, the happy, scary story. But a man in Alaska was attacked by a brown bear and survived. He was a real estate agent surveying a piece of land, and a brown bear jumped out. He didn't see it, and he tried to protect himself with his surveyor's pole, but the bear got him good, and bit his head, but then apparently didn't finish him off and ran away. And the guy is okay. 61-year-old guy. He's badly injured, but he's going to be fine and even going back to work tomorrow. So, yes, a bear attack story, but he survived. And so in the end, a good story. Be careful and be respectful of nature, but don't be so afraid that you don't go out in it, because sometimes you beat a bear. How about that? And now let's be honest. The only reason I even read that story is because I want to give Pico material for news dump jingles. ABC News and the Associated Press reporting that the leader of a violent white supremacist gang that began in Arkansas prisons was sentenced to 35 years more in prison Wednesday for his role in racketeering and drug conspiracy. His name is Wesley Gullet. Yeah, sounds like a white supremacist name. He's the president of the New Aryan Empire, which is incidentally the name of a band I was in high school. We were young. I had no idea. You know, I wasn't a band. Can't play. Anyway, he pled guilty in federal court in February to conspiracy to commit racketeering and conspiracy to possess methamphetamine with intent to distribute. And now he also is going to jail for the rest of his life, because he also apparently admitted to solicitation to commit murder and attempt murder along with other violent acts. So, yeah, let's put these white supremacists in jail. Thank you very much to U.S. District Judge Brian Miller. Okay, what else do I have for you? Something about cryptocurrency crash. I really try to pay no attention to it. I probably should pay more attention to it, but I just can't. You do that for me. If I need to talk about it, tell me who and when and how. Let's see, what else? Billy Porter revealed he's been living with HIV for 14 years. Chris Rock slammed cancel culture. Matthew Perry stunned fans with slurred speech in Friends reunion promo. And sad news in the comedy front. Comic genius Paul Mooney has passed away. I worked with Paul Mooney several times, got to know him and earned his trust and respect. I think I feel comfortable saying. But the best part about watching Paul Mooney perform was watching the white tourists who had no familiarity with his act but just showed up at Caroline's Comedy Club and got to know who Paul Mooney was. The reactions on their faces, the way that Paul talked. Amazing guy. Go watch all his stuff, listen to all his stuff, and marvel at the thinker and comedian that he was. Controversial dude, nonetheless, but a very, very important guy. One of Richard Pryor's, I think, top writers. All right, that is it for your news dump, and now it's time to get to my guests. But first, I've got to tell you about Indeed.com, because you are looking to hire people at your job. You're trying to find the best candidates. You're not sure where to go. Well, if you're the hiring expert for your company, what you really need help making your life easier is a short list of quality candidates, and you need a hiring partner who helps make your life easier, not harder. You need Indeed. Indeed.com is the job site that makes hiring as easy as 1, 2, 3. You just post, screen, and interview all on Indeed. Get your quality shortlist candidates whose resumes on Indeed match your description faster. Only pay for the candidates that meet must-have qualifications, and then you schedule and complete video interviews on your Indeed dashboard. It's so easy. You gotta go to Indeed. Makes it easier to connect. It makes hiring the right talent fast and easy. They got all these tools. Indeed Instant Match. That gives you quality candidates whose resume on Indeed fits your job description perfectly. Also, Indeed Skills Test that on average reduces hiring time by 27%. I'm always looking to make more time for the important things that I got to do at work and at home, so that's cool. You can choose from more than 130 skills tests or add your own. Then your must-have requirements, so you only pay for your applicants that meet them. And according to Talent Nest, Indeed delivers 4 times more hires than all other job sites combined. If you're hiring, you need Indeed. Get started right now with a free $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/standup. Go to Indeed.com/standup. Get a $75 credit right now. Indeed.com/standup. This offer is valid through June 30th. Terms and conditions apply. Go now. My first guest is a very talented writer and author. He is the author of 4 books, most recently, New York Times bestselling book, The Boys in the Boat. Did you read that? About this amazing crew team that competed in the 1936 Olympics in Germany. He also has taught writing at San Jose State University and Stanford University, and his new book is what we're talking about today. It's called Facing the Mountain. It provides a portrait of Japanese American life during World War II, but the lessons of this book have never been more relevant than now and what we've seen in the past several years. Since the start of the coronavirus pandemic, we've seen this rise of anti-Asian sentiment throughout the country. Well, Facing the Mountain forces us to grapple with the questions of who willingly and unwillingly make sacrifices for our country, how constitutional rights look different to each of us, and what it really means to be a patriot. It's called Unblinking, Unsentimental, and without euphemism. It's gotten amazing reviews. Facing the Mountain lays out in vivid detail, how the American government and people treated the Japanese Americans before and during the war and why it matters today. Ladies and gentlemen, I now introduce you, if you don't know him already, to a great author who's written a very important and interesting and entertaining book. It's my conversation with Daniel James Brown right now. All right, well, I have him now, and I'm very excited to be talking with him about his new book, Facing the Mountain. Daniel Brown, welcome to Stand Up. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I mean, how did you decide to write this book after your last book was such an enormous hit? The expectations, I'm sure, for your next book so high. I mean, your last book was optioned to make a film. This book has been optioned now to make a film. But what was it going from Boys in the Boat to Facing the Mountain that led you to this subject matter and, of course, this excellent book?
Yeah, well, it was quite a while ago. I think it was 2015. I met a guy in Seattle, a gentleman named Tom Ikeda. And Tom has, for the last 25 years, been videotaping and storing and making available to the public the oral histories of Japanese Americans, mostly folks who lived through the World War II eras, both first generation Issei and second generation Nisei Japanese Americans And so I met Tom, and he told me what he was doing, and I delved into this collection he has online of all of these hundreds of interviews. And I just was blown away by some of the stories I was hearing. They're obviously all about Japanese Americans, but they were also this kind of stories that I'm drawn to. They were stories about ordinary Americans confronting difficult circumstances and coming together, and persevering, overcoming those obstacles, and the kind of character that they displayed in doing those things. So it took a lot of going back and forth with Tom and listening to hundreds of these stories to whittle it down to what became Facing the Mountain.
And you said ordinary Americans. I always kind of get a little uncomfortable with that phrase because everybody, you know, there's so many different types and unique. And you also mentioned Nisei, and I learned through your book that Nisei is about Japanese people who are born in the U.S. or Canada, but whose parents immigrated from Japan. Do I have that right? First generation right. American, Japanese American.
Yes, that's correct.
And so they weren't ordinary because they were first generation Americans, and in this case, they were Japanese American at the time World War II broke out, right?
When World War II broke out, I'm talking actually literally, well, also the experience of their parents who were immigrants.
Sure.
But the second generation were the American citizens. You know, they faced a real dilemma at the beginning of the war. They, particularly young men of draft age, faced an enormous dilemma. Other young Americans were signing up by the millions to serve in the military. But they were not allowed to sign up to serve because of their ancestry. At the same time, their families and they themselves are being forced from their homes and incarcerated in these camps around the American West. They're being forced to walk away from their schooling, the businesses they owned, their homes. They're having to sell off their possessions for pennies on the dollars. They're having to leave beloved pets behind. Their whole lives are overthrown, basically. So what are they to do? How are they to react to this? And so I wind up focusing on 4 young men and their families and sort of the ways that they dealt with the situation and the paths they took through the war years.
Let's talk about these 4 young men and their families, and let me try to pronounce their names, sir. Here we go. We're talking about Gordon Hirabayashi, Rudy Tokiwa,
yep.
Fred Shiosaki, and Katz Miho. And so who of them were alive for you to speak to? You mentioned Tom's work at Densho, and there's so much documented, and folks should go and check that out and listen and watch these interviews. But, you know, for Boys in the Boat, you were influenced by one particular guy who you got to meet, who passed away shortly into your meeting him. But what about this situation? Did you get to meet and talk to anybody?
So of the 4 young men, or then young men that I wound up focusing on, only one of them, Fred Shiosaki, was still alive, and he was in his 90s. Fred actually just passed away a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
Which is unfortunate because it's just before the book was actually published.
Yeah.
But I was able to spend quite a bit of time with Fred. His son, Michael, facilitated some great conversations, and he was just such a neat guy. I remember when I met him, I stuck out my hand and to shake his hand. And I said, "I'm so honored to meet you." And he shook his head and said, "No, I'm honored to meet you." He was this incredibly modest man, even though he was a decorated war hero. And he was so typical in many ways of the other men that I write about. You know, as I say, it's focused on these 4 young men and their families. They had certain traits in common. And one of them was this real sense of honor, but another was this kind of humility about what they had done during the war years. So talking to Fred was an enormous help in writing his part of the story.
Do you consider yourself a historian?
You know, not really. I mean, I'm not a trained academic historian, and I don't I don't, for instance, this book is not, I'm not trying to write a comprehensive history of Japanese Americans or even Japanese Americans during World War II. What I do is I tell personal stories. There's a great deal of research and history involved in them. But what I try to do in my books is to tell deeply personal stories that shed a light on some slice of history. In this case, Japanese American history during World War II. But I see it more as a storytelling role than as an historian's role.
I consider you, I don't care what you think, I consider you a historian because we all learn differently. And I certainly learn through storytelling best. And I learned so much reading and researching Facing the Mountain. And I think anybody that is interested will as well. But I think it's also super relevant, and I want to go back to the book in a moment, but I think it's so relevant, history always is, because of the anti-Asian American, and around the world, we should say, hatred as a result of the COVID pandemic. And so I just want to get your take on doing all the research, writing this book, seeing what these men and their families went through, and seeing, I don't want to compare it to then, but seeing the violence and the hatred and the bigotry and the fear towards Asian American folks, Asian people of Asian descent in any way today, and what your reaction to it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's been remarkable, the parallels between what I was writing about and what I've been seeing in my own world. One of the things that happened with me is I thought I knew quite a bit about Asian American history growing up, but I learned how much I didn't know in the process of writing this book. In researching the history here, I learned a lot about how long there has been anti-Asian sentiment in this country, going back really to the gold rush in California. In the early 1850s, hundreds of thousands of Chinese immigrants came to the West Coast to work in the gold fields or work on railroads or work at whatever. And they were almost immediately met by an enormous amount of violence and prejudice. There were lynchings and burnings and people driven out of their homes in large numbers in the 1850s and 1860s. And then around the turn of the 20th century, there arose this, in the newspapers and in Hollywood, there was this notion of what they called the Yellow Peril, this idea that Asian immigrants brought with them, they were equated with locusts and snakes and rats and vermin, and the idea that they somehow brought disease to America was a really widely held opinion amongst Americans early in the 20th century. And, those sort of images and tropes and associations that developed during that period, they've been brought up, recycled kind of over and over through our history. It certainly happened right after Pearl Harbor. There was all this anger directed against Asians in general and Japanese Americans in particular, using that same old sort of racist imagery and tropes from before. And, I think we've seen it rise up again in the wake of the virus. It was already there. It was easy to bring up and weaponize again.
Yes, it's just so crazy that, Trump and many on the right were able to demonize it, a whole, not even an ethnicity, because anybody of Asian descent, people who are always ignorant and filled with hatred never even know who they're hating, and often target people that aren't even members of the group that they purport to hate and understand nothing about. But, from the Muslim ban to all the South American, Mexican type of talk, it just got so ugly, and it's hard to believe that we got back there. Did you, during your research, talk with any of the families and members about what is happening today and the parallels before we go, of course, back to the book?
Yeah, I mean, it's been inescapable. The parallels are just so inescapable. When I was researching and writing and talking to families about their immigrant parents or grandparents' experience, was about 4.5 years ago, right at the time when the Muslim ban and all this anti-immigrant rhetoric was out there. And so the parallel was obvious. And when I was writing about Japanese American families being torn apart by the incarcerations, was the same time that there was all these families being torn apart at the southern border. And so there have been, as I was writing the book, there were all these echoes from the past in what was happening as I was writing. So that naturally came up, sure, as I was talking to family members. They are Japanese Americans as a group are extremely aware of the parallels between their history and what's happening now.
And that's why this book is such an important book right now, and a history book, Facing the Mountain. Let's get back to those four guys who you write about. I mean, it must have been hard. I know Tom gave you, about a dozen different characters that you could look into, and somehow you were able to whittle it down to four. That must have been very, very difficult to choose, but you chose them carefully, I'm sure, and for different reasons. But we have to start, I think we should start with Gordon, because he wasn't in the military. He didn't sign up for what we then in a moment we'll talk about the 422nd. But he was a conscientious objector, a Quaker, a resistor. Did not sign up, huh?
Yeah, Gordon was a really interesting guy all his life. But when the war broke out, when Pearl Harbor happened, Gordon was a student at the University of Washington. And shortly after Pearl Harbor, a curfew was imposed on anybody of Japanese ancestry in Seattle. So you weren't allowed to be out on the streets after 8 p.m. Gordon, pretty early on, decided he wasn't going to obey that curfew. He deliberately and flagrantly disobeyed it. In fact, he kept a journal recording the incidents, the times when he had been out past the curfew. And then when the time came for Japanese Americans in Seattle to get on buses and be taken away to these camps, Gordon just didn't get on the bus. He became the last Japanese American living in Seattle. Instead, he wrote out this long, detailed statement in sort of broad constitutional terms, explaining why he felt that both the curfew and the incarcerations in these camps were wrong and unconstitutional. And instead of getting on the bus, he took that statement and he went downtown Seattle and he walked into the FBI offices downtown and handed the statement to an agent and turned himself in. And so he spent the rest of the war fighting this legal battle. He was and in and out of the detention facilities, was first kept at the King County jail in Seattle. Later, he was at a federal work farm in Arizona, work prison. And then he wound up towards the end of the war in a federal prison in Washington state. But all the while, his legal case was working its way up to the United States Supreme Court, where actually he lost. But in the long run, he was exonerated. His case was vacated decades later. Yeah. And actually, after he passed away, President Obama awarded him a Presidential Medal of Freedom for this very principled stand he had taken against the curfew and the incarceration.
When I read about that part, that he was posthumously awarded that, I thought, boy, there's a whole bunch of brave people today in the civil rights movements in America today that hopefully history will look back and recognize their courage as well. I fear history will be written in so many different ways, but I was just thinking about how back then, so long ago, they were seen as the enemy. And in fact, they were just as American as anybody else and living their lives, and they had their lives stolen from them in every possible way. Let's talk, we mentioned Fred, but let's talk about the other guys too, as much time as we have left here. Tell me about Rudy.
So Rudy Tokiwa grew up in Salinas, California on a farm. His family was forced from their home. They were incarcerated in a particularly bleak camp in Poston, Arizona. Really miserable place.
You call these places, by the way, just to be clear, you refer to them as concentration camps. So does Tom, and why?
So I want to be clear about that. I'm in no way equating these camps with the death camps and the slave labor camps of the Nazis. They were not that. But they were concentration camps. They were designed to concentrate a particular population of an ethnic minority behind barbed wire in order to remove them from the general population. Franklin Roosevelt himself called them concentration camps before the war got started, but he was envisioning these camps. So it is the right term to use. But again, I want to be clear that there's no equivalence between them and the Nazi death camps. But it was part of, the government used a lot of very soft language describing what they were doing to Japanese Americans. And one of the terms they avoided was concentration camps. But I think you need to use really honest languge if you're going to tell an honest story.
I interrupted you to get that definition about Rudy's story. Sorry.
So anyway, Rudy's family was incarcerated at the Poston camp. And Rudy was one of these young men who volunteered out of the camp to sign up in early 1943 for the all-Japanese American 442nd Regimental Combat Team, which was a segregated Japanese American unit in the Army. They wound up serving in Europe and serving with enormous distinction. They wound up being if not then one of the most decorated units of its size, not just in World War II, but in American military history.
Yeah, and before we do run out of time, we got to talk about, facing the mountain and that mountain. They joined the 22nd. Am I saying it right?
442nd.
442nd. Oh boy. And I'm gonna really minimize a very amazing book and a heroic accomplishment. They saved a whole bunch of Texas boys.
They did. It's a long story. I'll try to keep it very short, but General Dahlquist ordered a unit of what was called the Texas Division, young men, mostly from Texas, some from Oklahoma, out onto the end of a ridgeline in the Vosges forest in northern France. And they got surrounded, cut off by the Germans, trapped there. Many of them were wounded. They began to die. They had no medical supplies. They ran out of food and water. They were in desperate straits. General Dahlquist knew he was to blame for sending them in there so far in. He sent one unit up after another to try to rescue them, to try to break through and get them out of there. Nobody could. Finally, he called on the all-Japanese American 442nd, and they went up that mountain, and it's absolutely hellacious fighting conditions, and they took enormous casualties. But they did break through and get the Texans out of there.
Years later, one of them, who I forget which one, was in uniform, and he met a guy. Tell us what happened when a Japanese American in an Army uniform meets one of these Texas boys years later.
Yeah. I actually was on the way back from the war for a couple years later. Fred Shiosaki was on a train station in Washington, D.C., and one of the Texans recognized his 442nd patch on his shoulder, came up and said, "Hey, I was one of those guys up in the mountain you rescued. I just want to shake your hand to thank you." And Fred wouldn't do it. He had lost so many friends going up that mountain. They had suffered so terribly, and he just wasn't at a place yet. And he later said he felt ashamed that he didn't shake the man's hand. But he came home, like a lot of these guys, with a lot of pain.
Yeah.
And he wasn't yet ready to do that.
Yeah, that anecdote, I think, illustrates the extent or the complexity of the pain. Two guys on the same side, and yet he couldn't do it. There's so much more to talk about, but the last thing I want to ask you is why you think, Daniel, that your book is such a great book to buy for a summer read, Facing the Mountain. I highly recommend it.
Well, I think it's a good read. I think the stories are engaging, but I also think I do think they're particularly timely right now. I didn't really, when I started writing that, I didn't know the path the world was going down. But given all that's happening, I really think this will shed some light on one facet of American history that needs to see more light. I think people, if they learn the personal stories of these families as immigrants, and the subsequent generation, what they sacrificed for this country in particular, I think it will open some hearts, and that's my hope anyway. that it'll build a little more understanding of what, not just Japanese Americans, but Asian Americans and immigrant families in general, the things they have done to help build this country and the sacrifices they have made.
Daniel, thanks for joining me. Congratulations on another amazing, super important book, and I hope to talk to you again.
All right. Thanks so much for having me.
There you go. DanielJamesBrown.com is his website. The book is Facing the Mountain. He's on Twitter at DJamesBrown, where I'd love for you to tell him that you enjoyed our conversation at DJamesBrown. Wow. Really great book. So interesting and such an important topic. And I learned a lot in prepping for that book. You can hear many of the guys there, actual audio in their own words. Go to densho.org, DENSHO.org, which is a great organization that is dedicated to preserving, educating, and sharing the story of World War II era incarceration of Japanese Americans. And I highly recommend it because I learned a lot from that organization, which is much of what Daniel based his research on. Okay, so my next guest also comes highly recommended by an old friend of mine. I met him when he was an intern at the Colbert Report, where I was, of course, the audience warm-up comedian for, I think, over 6 years. His name is John Staff. He was he went to Harvard with my next guest, and so he reached out to me and said, "You really should interview Pete Davis." And so I learned more about Pete Davis. I watched his commencement speech at Harvard, which is great. And I have been reading his new book. It's called Dedicated, The Case for Commitment in an Age of Infinite Browsing. Adam Grant blurbs this book and says, "This is a brilliant book about one of the defining predicaments of our time, the temptation to keep our options open. Pete Davis is the fresh voice of wisdom that our culture desperately needs, and Dedicated is required reading for the 21st century pursuit of happiness and success." Ladies and gentlemen, at Pete Davis on Twitter, PeteDavis.org is the website, Dedicated is the book. Here is my first ever conversation with Pete Davis. There he is now, Pete Davis. I have just told everybody about you, and the book is so good, so important, so interesting. Dedicated, The Case for Commitment in an Age of Infinite Browsing. Where on earth did you come up with this concept and this idea? Welcome to the show. Also, sorry.
So glad to be here, Pete. Wonderful name. I wrote this book because as I was growing up and other people my age were growing up, we kept getting this message, which was keep your options open. The message we kept getting from older people was when you are picking your first job, make sure you have a job that keeps your options open for a future job. Don't get tied down with, that person you love. You never know if there are other people around the corner. Don't speak your mind because you don't know if that'll close off other options. And so that was the message we were getting. Keep your options open.
What's wrong with that message?
Well, the thing is, as I got older and I started kind of collecting heroes and finding people that I was looking up to, the people that I respected most, the people that seemed to be getting the most respect, having the most fun, having the most impact on important things, were the people that didn't keep their options open. They were the people that committed to a particular thing, a particular cause or craft or community or person or idea or institution. They were the long haul heroes, the people who worked at things for 5, 10, 20 years that were having the most impact and experiencing the most joy. So this book is a bit of an intervention on that message of keeping your options open to say, maybe you should consider not keeping your options open and committing to something for a long time.
One of the people that you profile is a hero of mine who I interviewed many, many times over the years, named Evan Wolfson. Why did you choose him? Talk to me about the great Evan Wolfson.
Such a, it reveals a particular reason I wrote this. I work in politics in my day-to-day life, and he is such a great example of someone who's achieved serious political change. He is one of the main figures behind the 32-year push for marriage equality, for gay marriage in the U.S. And he started in his third year of law school writing a paper in the 80s called The Constitutional Right to Same-Sex Marriage. And when he wrote that paper in the early 80s, it was considered a very fringe paper. Even just writing a school paper about the concept of maybe having this was considered fringe and out there. But what Evan did, along with thousands of others, is he took the long walk of convincing the larger queer community to making this a priority, to getting the first state, Hawaii, to legalize gay marriage, to fighting in the 90s as there was a backlash to his push in Hawaii, to getting the first solid state that still has gay marriage equality, Massachusetts, to fighting state by state. And eventually 32 years after he wrote that paper, marriage equality became the law of the land. And so the message that Evan Wolfson shows is that change takes time, but it does happen. Part of this is a message of fighting back against people who think change will happen quickly, but also fighting against people who say change will never happen.
Yeah,
it usually does happen. It just takes a while.
Which is why this book is so important. And I feel like, when we can talk about your day job, we can talk about, the Democracy Policy Network, and we can talk about certain initiatives, ideas, and fights, but we can also talk about who the players are these days. And we can talk about the right all day, but the left is becoming similar to the right in terms of wanting the problem to be solved right now, as opposed to it taking as long as Evan Wolfson did on marriage equality, as long as it is going to take for Medicare for all and so on. Can you talk to me a little bit about how some people on the left are impatient about change right now?
Well, I'll reveal one of the messages of my book is you should kind of stand by with the people that you stand with and be open about it. So I'll say I'm a man of the left. I am from that side of the spectrum, and I'll never I'll never belittle anyone who is making a demand for justice. But what I will say to them when we're talking ourselves is I will say, there's that old Gandhi line, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. Each of those phases lasts a while. And politics, the philosopher Max Weber called it the slow boring of hard boards, which he meant like grinding a hole into a hard piece of wood. It is something that, it's not going to be solved in one giant march in the streets. It's not going to be solved with a dramatic speech. It's going to be solved by forming local groups everywhere across the country, doing the door-to-door organizing that it takes, conversation to conversation, persuasion to persuasion, then getting from the point that you're thought of as fringe to considering being, part of the both sidesism, okay, now one side says this, one side says that, then it becomes getting to a majority. That's part of the fight too. And then even if you have a majority, that doesn't mean it's law yet. Then you got to convert that majority into political power that fights. And there are no shortcuts in that process. It's not going to be just because we want it. We have to fight for it.
Well, the shortcuts, though, are introduced, I think, through popular media, especially places like YouTube or social media as well. I mean, just demanding that there be change today, tonight, and then you get a whole bunch of people watching, you divide everybody, and it's so unrealistic. It's ridiculous, and it's happening now on the left the way it always has on the right. I mean, Hannity and Limbaugh perfected it, but now I see it a lot on the left in the media as well, telling people this can happen right now. And meanwhile, you got like Bernie Sanders and AOC going, no, there's a process to it. You have to govern. You have to build, a base to speak.
Yeah, I have a part of the book where I talk about the difference between cinematic dragon slaying
I like this.
And long haul heroism. So, in Hollywood, you have to have a good movie. And, a movie's boring if it's just one long montage of people in meetings. And so they like focusing on the big speeches or the big fights or the big clever takedowns. And Twitter's built for this too. It's like a machine designed to have you slay a dragon every hour on the hour. But what you'll notice with all that dragon slaying is not a lot changes because you had a bunch of clever dunks on Twitter. That's not, Joe Biden ends up winning despite the fact he didn't have any Twitter presence or something, the primary. And what we need to understand is that change usually doesn't happen through cinematic dragon slaying. It usually happens through a lot of meetings, a lot of persuasive conversation, a lot of coalition building. And a thing I really respect about AOC and Bernie is joining the institutions that you want to reform. So, people call AOC or Bernie, these bomb throwers from the outside. But what's funny about them is they ran for office. They were people who decided to go into the arena and face the consequences of institutional life. And I have a lot of respect for that.
Is it okay to support institutions and criticize them? Can we do both?
I think the most effective reformers of institutions are the people who join them and then criticize them from the inside.
Right.
I think there's a role to play for kind of visionary outsiderism. You can see it in the 80s with ACT UP, in the fight for gay rights. You can see it in a lot of places. I feature the Quaker dwarf Benjamin Lay, who went around the country in the early 1800s fighting against slavery by doing dramatic renditions of like blood on the Bible and things like that. You need that, but you also need someone coming in after that visioning, joining the institutions and changing them from the inside. And that insider-outsiderism is a very effective way of making change. That's why union organizers, for example, really good union organizers will tell you, we don't need a bunch of outsiders. We don't just need a bunch of outsiders picketing the factory. We need the workers in the factory coming together and having a strike. That's going to be much more effective of changing that factories than just having outsiders pick it out.
But it's so much easier just to be an outsider and to critique everybody from the outside and not get involved.
One of the things I talk about in the book is this fear of association, which is exactly what you're talking about. The ease of just, I think when we want to be an outsider, we want to perfectly, to join up with other people is messy. It involves working, it involves all the threats to your own identity, your own reputation, and the literal problem of just like working together in groups. And if you remain an outsider, you can be perfectly all of your positions. Yes. You can say everything you think at that moment. You don't have to work with other people.
Purity.
But yes. And so, but we need to overcome that fear of association. I talk about there's a security in being alone and isolated. You have to pass through a valley of uncertainty to build community and to join up with something, all the messiness of coming together with other people to work on something together. But then on the other end of that valley of uncertainty and pain and messiness is an even bigger power and impact and security of community, which any solidarity building organization has been able to show. So that's what we got to pass through.
Yeah, for sure. But it would seem that we have a very difficult time, this generation of thinkers, even of visionaries, and certainly of politicians, with the idea of compromising. I'm not going to get everything I want right now, but I'm going to get a lot of what I want, or at least some of what I want, and change and progress are incremental anyway. It feels like people don't know that. They've forgotten it. They never learned it. But what about compromising to achieve an objective?
What's amazing about entering into a long haul is I think everything involves compromise with other people, but that doesn't, by being willing to fight over the long haul and know that, change doesn't come quickly, you actually can have broader visions and more out there ideas that don't necessarily compromise with an unjust order that you don't believe in. Like, I think it's great that the abolitionists in the 1820s said, we will not tolerate slavery. We're going to start a long haul fight. But in their and I don't think we'd be in a good country right now if those abolitionists or the feminists in the early 1900s or the civil rights fighters in the 1930s that were starting the fight that became the wins in the 1960s. I don't think it would be good if they said, we're going to have to compromise with this unjust order. But in the process of realizing their radical visions, they had to compromise with each other. They had to accept piecemeal changes. They had to build towards something and work together. And so there's part of the personality, even in achieving radical change, that's going to require compromise.
How much has the internet, social media, and technology changed our attention span in terms of our impatience, in terms of wanting to succeed, wanting to complete the mission right now? Because I guess if I look at the issues that I care the most about, say climate, I mean, I may not live to see the end of fossil fuels, but I hope that I will be doing as much of my part as I can for 30 or 40 years or whatever I am involved in that. But at the same time, I can get what I want in so many different arenas and ways right now in an hour. So it kind of makes me think, or conditions me and generations after me, my daughters, to think that change comes in an hour or as quick as your drone can deliver it.
Yeah, you have kind of the immediate satisfaction of wants. That's one part of the internet. The other part of the internet is you have all of these things that can show you the grass is always greener, or all the things that you can experience FOMO about. You can browse through 1,000 people on a dating app. And then when you choose one of them and go on a date, instead of thinking, is he or her, okay, you constantly think, are they better than the other 1,000, 10,000 people I could be swiping through?
Yeah.
So if you're judging everyone against 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 people, you're never going to lock it in with someone. And if you're judging every cause or community or place or career against, all the other videos you could watch of people in a different place, Instagram feeds of people somewhere else, of people working in a different way, of people having what appears on the surface to be more success than you, you're never going to commit to the thing that will allow you to even have a shot at feeling satisfied at anything. Because, there's no joy or impact or satisfaction in the hallway of life. There's only in the rooms. But if there's 1,000 doors you have to close when you enter a room, that's going to be that much more painful. And that's why I think we're experiencing what I call infinite browsing mode much more now than we might have 100 years ago.
Give me more examples of this. This phrase, I think, is so important and interesting to recognize and to say out loud. This is yours, right? You came up with this idea, infinite browsing, and I think it's super important to think about.
Yeah, it's inspired by, the opening of the book is this very normal experience we all experience, which I'm sure you've had this experience. It's late at night. You're browsing Netflix looking for something to watch. You scroll through different titles. You read a few reviews. You watch a few trailers, but you can't commit to any given movie. And then suddenly you find yourself 30 minutes later, you're stuck in what I've called infinite browsing mode. You're too tired to watch anything now, so you cut your losses and fall asleep. And you're stuck on the menu screen of life instead of never watching a movie. And if you just picked a movie, it might not have been the perfect movie. There might have been another movie that was better than that movie, but it's sure as heck better than just waiting on the menu screen for 30 minutes. And that's what I'm saying is the experience we feel with so many things in life. I don't want to lock it in with this person I'm in love with and start a family because there could be someone better around the corner. Another is either by force, which is like the gig economy, or by choice, which is just kind of job hopping. There's a lot in career tracks where we're thinking, I want to be this, but I should have been that. There's a lot in cause work where you get inundated with thousands of injustices happening all around the world, but you'll only have an impact if you focus in on one or two and actually, go to the meetings and do the work that's necessary for that. And in another way, it's the experience of kind of locking into a place as well. It's like, if you feel, I might move any day now, you're not going to get to know your neighbors. You're not going to get involved in bettering your town. If you're looking for the perfect neighborhood to live in, instead of thinking, I'm going to join a neighborhood and make it more perfect together with my neighbors, we're never going to have beautiful neighborhoods if everyone's a browser and no one's a rooted committer. So there's all these different areas where it comes up.
What about in your personal health? I mean, you talked about relationships, but I mean like mental, physical health.
Yeah, like committing to a regime of something. Is that,
for sure. Like I have back issues, and what I'd love to do is go to the doctor and say, you have a disc issue. We can operate. We can pop that back in, and you won't have any more pain. But I know what the problem is because I know enough about physiology, which is that I just need to do more stretching, and I need to move more, and I need to stop sitting, and it'll get better. But that's a harder commitment to make because it's a longer commitment. It's a repetitive thing that I have to do every day versus a surgery. The same is true of a diet pill or anything else with kind of physical health. And I could talk about mental health too. I'm too reactionary, impulsive, and angry, and I wish that there was just a book I could read, one therapy session I could have that would just flip that switch off. But the truth is, it's a practice.
Yeah, I'm talking about this I've been talking about this on the show at the largest level, like fighting for gay marriage or fighting climate change or something like this. But it comes down to everything, even at the smallest, most personal level. Yeah. So I'll give an example here, which is like, I talked to the lead mentors, the mentorship organization in my home city of DC. And this is kind of like personal health or something. It's as intimate as just one person to one person. And they told me, you get one mentor who's the most charismatic, fun, edutainment mentor. And you get another mentor who's totally uncharismatic, kind of lame, kind of dweeby. But this mentor over here is flaky, and this mentor over here is ready to do the 3-year walk with that kid and keep returning to that kid and saying, I choose you over and over again every Thursday afternoon. We're going and hanging out. The second mentor is going to be a better mentor, hands down. And I think it's the same with anything in our personal life. It's often less picking the perfect thing and picking the perfect regime of, health or mental health or practice, and more about, can you just stick to something for a while and let its effects work on you. And I think that's one of the messages of the book as well, too.
Who did you interview for this book, for this research? I know it came out of your speech at Harvard, your commencement speech, which was really great and impressive and brief and to the point. I loved it so much. But who have you talked to? Who have you learned from? Who have been your mentors that helped formulate this?
For the book, I interviewed 50 long haul heroes. And it was from all walks of life. And it's amazing. So, I split it into 6 categories. People who were committed to causes, I call them citizens. So I did like Evan Wolfson, for example, or the other was people who were committed to places. I called them patriots, local patriots, not just kind of, bunting on the 4th of July patriots, but people who love their neighborhoods. And, I talked to Peggy Berryhill, who's been running for 50 years a radio show about Native American issues, or Pierce Freelon, who decided, instead of complaining about his town of Durham, North Carolina, running for city council. I talked to builders, people who made an idea a reality, very important stewards. There's this old Kurt Vonnegut quote, we have too many people turning ideas into reality and not enough people stewarding them and maintaining them. We need more people working on maintenance. So I talked to a rabbi who's, talk about maintenance, keeping a 1,000-year-old religion going for one more generation and passing it off to the next one. Or Gabriel Grajeda, who, runs the Bolivian dance troupe in my town, and said, someone when I was a kid taught me about these Bolivian dances, and now I'm teaching the kids about the Bolivian dances. Fun one that probably my favorite was in artisans, people who hone a craft. I talked to Mickey Raphael, who was Willie Nelson's harmonica player. And I loved interviewing him because the harmonica seems like such a small thing to commit to. But he decided at age 16, when he was a little, he was a lonely kid in high school, he sees a guy play the harmonica at the Rubaiyat Club in Dallas. He feels the spark of the divine in that moment, and he started playing. He got so good, he became known all around Dallas as the teen wizard harmonica player. Willie Nelson heard him play and said, want to join my band? And because Mickey Raphael committed to the harmonica, he ended up touring for 40 years with Willie Nelson, played for presidents, played all around the world. His commitment took him on a journey. And then finally, companions, people who were committed to people, teachers, pastors, parents. I just interviewed someone about being a mom, or I interviewed someone about their recovery journey in the 12-step program, and like what is involved in the commitment to that. And, this is all part of it. I'm sure, Pete, I'd love to hear about you. I used to do stand-up, and I used to be told you aren't a real stand-up artist until you've bombed like 250 times. And so I'd love to hear, I know you're in the comedy scene. Is there an experience of being like 10 years into something in a craft and really knowing its ins and outs that you wouldn't know at the beginning of the journey? Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's less about, that's an easier one to understand, bombing, but it's more about doing every type of gig. I think that you do every single type of gig, the awful ones in the strangest venues for audiences that shouldn't be there, didn't even know there was going to be a comedy show, to the very best ones on Saturday nights in large or small venues where people came to laugh and enjoy comedy. But it's a great example of something, in the artisan category where you just have to keep watering it. And I think that's what, I don't want to miss that in our conversation about commitment, which is you got to show up every day and keep watering it and keep being innovative. And I think that sometimes
it's easy to lose that in reading your book if you want to simplify things. If you just make this juxtaposition between browsing and commitment, the truth is commitment requires you to reinvent and be innovative every day. I mean, the better example for me now is not as much comedy, because I did all of those different types of gigs and I'll never stop doing comedy. But the podcast itself, I do this daily. I love doing this, but every day I want to do something different. I don't want to be repetitive, and I want to keep working to make it better, but I am committed to doing it every day. And I am committed to doing it, frankly, for as long as I can. And I love that idea, but at the same time, I don't want it to get boring for me to do, and I don't want it to get boring for the listener to subscribe to, or else I'm not able to make a living. So I think I'm pretty stuck on that one right now.
Yeah, there was a wonderful thing the rabbi told me when I talked to the rabbi in my town about. I go, do you ever get, I tried to ask goofy questions to get at different angles. I said, do you ever get bored of the prayers? You have to do the same prayer every year at the same holiday. And she told me the story of like an old joke that rabbis tell each other, where they say, a rabbi and a cantor are sitting, and it's the 25th year of them being together. It's like the 25th high holidays season. And the rabbi's studying the prayer book before the service. And the cantor goes up to the rabbi and goes, why are you studying the prayer book? You've been doing this for 25 years. Haven't you memorized it? And the rabbi responds, the prayers haven't changed, but I have. And she was saying that to mean you can keep the same form, but you have to come to it with a renewed sense of life and vitality, and you have to bring your own changes in your own life to the same form. And actually, in doing the same form, it reveals those changes in a much more fascinating way, because it's like, it's interesting to watch. I'm a David Letterman obsessive. Late CBS David Letterman, when he was kind of tired of being the goofy prankster, is a different style than 80s David Letterman. And but because it's always the same late night show, you can see that in such kind of stark juxtaposition, and the changes become more kind of apparent and alive by having the same form. Yeah, that's a great example. I wonder if you could say the same to a priest as a rabbi. I guess you could. I like the kid. Yeah, well, there's a funny thing about the priest. I heard once. I heard from someone once that there's this rule with priest. I'm half Catholic, half Jewish, so a lot of Catholic and Jewish examples in the book. But there's actually a rule in the handbook for priests where when they hold up the host in the mass, they have to. It is Catholic illegal for the priest to not feel that moment with their full self. It is illegal to go through the motions, and do it mindlessly. They have to bring their whole being to it. And the reason I first heard that was a songwriter that I love talked about that rule, because he was once asked, you have to play your number one hit, every single concert for the rest of your life. And he said, I try to think about the priests holding up the hosts and feeling alive and not going through the motions when I play my number one hit again, like when Eve Six plays, Inside Out again or something, or Don McLean does this show and they're shouting American Pie, please. The way to make it work is you have to feel like the first time you played it all over again. You got to feel like day one. Therein lies a little bit of the difference between music and comedy, though. Yes. Because you can't hear a comedy bit over and over and enjoy it each time the way you can a song, is my argument. Amen. Yes. You agree with that? Yeah. No, I totally agree. I know it's different in form. Yeah, I'd love to. Oh, yeah. Well, I was just going to say, I think music is harder than comedy, except for that one thing where you can repeat a song over and over and it can be as enjoyable every time. I don't know about the performing, but certainly to hear. You can wake up 10 years having not toured and just play the same set you did 10 years ago and people are happy. But comedy, it has to be relevant. One other part of comedy I'd love to hear your thoughts on too is, part of this message of this book is it's kind of a communal book. It's about community, not just about individuality, rise and grind. And one of the things I loved when I was back in the comedy scene is I love that there was a culture of elders and newbies and things like that. It was I used to perform in Boston a lot, and it was Jimmy Tingle is coming tonight. Sure. And the rookies would you'd wanna perform well because Jimmy Tingle was in the room or something. And that sense of reverence for like the passing of the torch of generations, things like that. That gives meaning and purpose and community to our life when you have a stable form that has a heritage like that. And people are always reinventing it, updating it, but there's something beautiful about, the hip hop artists that say, I used to look up to you and now if people look up to me, the comedy people that say, if I could be half as good as Richard Pryor, I would be doing good, things like that. And I don't know if, how'd you experience that?
Well, I think
intergenerational aspect of the scene.
The interesting thing about comedy for sure, and I wonder what it is like in other industries and careers, but one of the big problems is that the elders don't help the new people. They don't, and for different reasons. Some are maybe noble, but the only one would be, if this is a horrible career and business, and so if you really want it, you got to realize it's hard, and I'm going to haze you, and I'm going to be mean or rude, or just not, talk to you at best. I always thought that sucked. That's the way people treated me when I started. And I made a very, very strong choice at the very beginning to never do that to young comics. And I've really prided myself on being a mentor. But that's the insecurity of, I think, a lot of artists, a lot of performers, and especially comedians. And I'm not sure that happens in finance or politics or technology. Maybe it does. And there's always, cutthroat businesses where you don't want to help somebody. You don't want to make them better. But that never made any sense to me. But comedians are notorious for kind of hazing or brutalizing young comics or just ignoring them completely because of the reasons I just already stated without being repetitive. I mean, I feel like that's one of the terrible qualities in show business, but especially in comedy. It's,
Well, I'm glad you are trying to blaze a counterculture of that.
Never made any sense to me because the truth is, one anecdote is there's a lot of them really, and I'm super proud about it. But like Amy Schumer wrote a whole page in her memoir or book about me when she started, about how I looked out for her and how I mentored her and how I didn't want anything in return. I just thought she was good and that she could do it. And the fact that she then became super successful and well known and mentioned that was 100% worth it to me. And and she would return the favor if I ever asked her or something like that. I mean, those types of things, collaboration and working together can come back when you least expect it, I think. And I've never understood why people don't do more of that for selfish reasons, even.
Well, this is what we have to push for. We have to have more people do this because, it's more pleasant for everyone.
Well, culture of collaboration versus the culture.
And you have to take the long haul view of it. Alexis de Tocqueville, this old philosopher from France, said, we need to have self-interest rightly understood. And what that is, over the long haul, if you're good to people, it'll come back in some way or another. But you have to have that long haul view, which is one of the messages.
Well, let me ask you a question to kind of combine all of your work, this book with your day job, with spreading democracy and fighting for all different kinds of justice, which is it unique to American or is it generational? Because you look around the world and you can see the best example is to how people came together or apart over COVID, over looking out for each other or for just themselves. And I wonder how America is, if different from other modern day cultures and societies where collectivism and community are more ingrained in their culture, in their governments, in their politics, as opposed to America, where individualism, rugged individualism, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, not helping other people. Why would I pay for your health insurance? Those kind of things.
There's wonderful political science research on this. There's this great book by Robert Putnam called Bowling Alone, which is about the decline of community in America. And it's about how, 50 years ago, there would be many more of these community organizations at the local level that would weave people together, also across difference, in some ways it's like the Elks and Kiwanis and like those clubs, what kind of lingers in college fraternities and sororities, but there used to be a lot more and a lot less toxic. The idea of like local communities having a place where more people would engage in them, come together around shared problems instead of just waiting for someone else to do it for them, and a general kind of spirit of we're all in this together, not we're all in it for ourselves, what Putnam calls a we society instead of an I society. And there's documented, this isn't just warm, cuddly feelings. There's documented things that Putnam and other political scientists have found in polling and time diaries and other ways of measuring people's engagement that have seen a decline. But what that points to, though, that it's been higher in the past, a spirit of community, is we could do it again. And I think one of the messages of this book and the message of Putnam's and others' books is that the community is not going to just be one giant media message that's going to change our morality. You learn to be communal at a local level with real concrete organizations that bring people together. So real neighbors starting a neighborhood block party together, real people starting a book club together, real people saying, let's come together and make our town more green, or fight for racial justice at the local level, or fight for, fight City Hall and start a local newspaper that we can all share in. And so one of the messages of the book is it's not that I kind of challenge the question of like throw up our hands and say this is what America's always been and what it will always be. We can decide as a culture, we can decide on an individual level to start reweaving our country together again, to start building those things. And if you're listening right now, my two messages would be if you're not too into leading, be more open to joining.
Yes.
Go out and search for something and join. And if you have the bug of being a leader, go start something, start something that brings people together. Start small. Say, I want to bring, it can be small and fun. It can just be like, we're going to start a rotating, I interviewed someone in the book whose parents said every Friday night, we're going to have a pizza night at our house and it's open to anyone who wants to come. And that's all they said. And they just told their kids, hey, tell your friends and your friends' parents, you can always come to our Friday night pizza party. And slowly the news spread and the news spread and the news spread. And now it's a huge community institution called like Fridays at the Olmsteads or something. And they are now like leaders in the town because of just that small act of opening themselves up. And part of the messages of the book is we need to be brave. This is a form of courage to open yourself up to working together with other people and become a more communal people.
It feels like, I can't describe it, but it feels like, I don't know what it's called. You're far more intelligent than I am. And I think it's like the idea that I have a great idea to create change, to create positive impact in my community. And then I look into it, I do a little research and I realize, oh, somebody's already kind of doing that. Nah, forget it. As opposed to saying, it doesn't have to be my idea. There aren't always a lot of original ideas. To me, it was original. I didn't realize this. I thought I came up with this, but you know what? Someone's already doing it. And I think that the problem there is that you don't say, well, let me get on board with that organization. They're already doing it. It's not exactly what my idea is, but I can support them, as opposed to coming up with my own idea that I have to lead on. I feel like it's problematic with our politics, with our communities. I have to own it. It's got to be about me. It's got to be my idea. No, it doesn't.
Well, it's the have it your way. It's like every American is a Burger King. It's like it's consumer culture. The customer is always right. Have it your way. It's when you're interacting in a corporate transaction. The whole spirit of that is you are king. Look at you. You're in charge. You can have anything you want. Right. You can yell at our wait staff. You can get mad that this happened. You say you want something else in the store. We'll pre-order it for you, things like that. But in civic life, in neighborhood life, in political life, we can't all be kings. We have to be neighbors. We have to be fellow citizens. It doesn't mean you have to, be lower than each other. You just have to be equal. We have to humble ourselves to be equal to each other. And having a realm of our life where we are willing to work together, not just boss people around, is key to this. And I think we'll discover that that'll lead to more joy and community and purpose and impact than just having a world where we're all alone, kings of our own consumer destiny.
What do you say to quitters? I have a complicated relationship with quitting because, and as a parent and just in my own life, I always was committed to never quitting something I really wanted until I got to a point where I realized, well, I don't have to stay doing this thing because I don't really want it anymore. Or I was going after this thing and I found out what it was, and I don't want that, and it's okay to quit. But I see the other problem is, and a lot of people blame, young folks for this. I'm not sure that it's fair, but it's if you don't get what you want, if you don't have success in your mission right away, you quit. But the truth is, in every single issue, in every fight, we can, I like this phrase, however you want to put it, take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, 3 forward, 5 back. But if you quit, you'll never get to the point that you'd always wanted to be. But so often it seems adversity and setbacks make us want to quit on any of these very important issues. And I don't know if you have any thoughts or if there's any data about how that plays out generationally, but it is easy to say about young people that they're more likely to stop something because it didn't work out the way they wanted it to.
Yeah, I have a whole section in the book that is, says straight up, in praise of quitting, if you feel like everything is an existential threat, Scientology makes you sign a 1 billion-year contract when you join them. If you feel like everything is a 1 billion-year contract, you're never going to commit to anything because the stakes are way too high. So I say one of the first steps to committing is lowering the stakes and know that you can, no one's going to arrest you if you quit, except for like very significant things like being a parent or something. Right. But the thing I tell people in the book is you have to separate out, am I quitting because of boredom, distraction, uncertainty, grass is always greener syndrome, fear of missing out, unnecessary regret about how everything would have been perfect if you chose something else? Or am I quitting because really the life has gone out of this relationship and like that I have with this thing? And so I say, this book is not just a rigid finger wagging book.
Right.
If you totally feel no life in the anymore, play act with the dead commitment, just by rote because Pete told me to be dedicated. That's not good. But it's saying the book is a slight nudge to say, when you're feeling like quitting, do a little inventory to say, is this just because I'm distracted? Is this just because I'm uncertain? And let's go through each of those. Distracted, everything's going to distract you. There's hundreds of things that are thrown at you all the time. Uncertainty, nothing will ever be certain. Certainty only grows with, longer commitments. There will always be things telling you to doubt yourself. Boredom, everything that matters is going to have tedious meetings and is going to have parts that are not, you're excited to be doing this interview, but you might have to have a time where you call the microphone company and wait on hold as you fix the microphone for the podcast or something. Everything involves a boring half of it. And fear of missing out, anything, one of my messages is, what you should really be fearing missing out is missing out on the things that come 5, 10, 15 years into a commitment. You might miss out on going to that party if you commit to something, but if you never commit to something, you'll miss out on your 5th anniversary with your wife or husband, your experience of totally mastering a craft without fear, your experience of being the elder in a community. That's what you should fear missing out. So do that inventory, sit with your why of why you originally did this, and sit with like, do I still feel life in that original why? And if you don't, then quit. And you've gone through the inventory and know it's not that, then quit. But if you think it's one of those things and you still believe in your why, maybe this book is a nudge to have you stick with it.
I love it. I love it. A lot of nuance that's important. And it's a great book. It's super inspiring. And so are you. Just talking about it, your passion, and prepping to talk to you. I was like, I really want to talk to this guy. This guy has a lot of passion, a lot of joie de vivre. And I really, it's infectious. And I'm psyched to meet you and to read this book. And I think people are going to get a lot out of it. Dedicated, The Case for Commitment in an Age of Infinite Browsing. Next time, let's talk about your day job. And yeah, congratulations on it, man. It's great. And I really appreciate you joining me.
Thank you, Pete. And, you doing this podcast every day is a great example of the spirit of long haul commitment. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you very much, sir. All right. Thank you for listening to this and for your subscription. If you haven't already signed up, please, sorry to ask incessantly over every single podcast for your money, but that's what you got to do. I don't have a marketing budget. I just have to beg for you to subscribe to the podcast. And so many of you already have, and I cannot thank you enough because it allows me to come out here and do this in the shed, the work I love to do each and every day on this daily podcast. So thank you for your support. If you haven't signed up right now, go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic, and you can join so many of us that will be together every Thursday at 8 p.m. at our stand-up happy hour hangout, 8 p.m. tonight at 8 p.m. East, the only time zone that matters to us East Coast elitists. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope to see you tonight, and I will talk to you tomorrow right here on Stand Up. Take it away, John Carroll.
When you can't see the forest for the burning trees, you got to stand up. Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense and you stand up. Stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up. Stand up. Got to stand